we were offered the material to read through the committee, you stated that the committee and the administration agrees with the committee's finding that specifically said that me, Earl, and the dying girl was that we had some students mature enough. Now that doesn't, to me, when I say some students, that means the school recognizes that not all high school students are mature enough to read that. And according to our policy 3105, it even mentions that the books should be selected based on maturity levels of the students served. The question I have is, the policy doesn't, it says the students we serve as a whole, not some students. So how do you think, and I guess the question I'm asking you is, if we don't have a grading system or a system to get it out there, then how are we controlling which students are mature enough and which are not?
So I would say that any of the books that the media specialists vet, they look through a lens of the entire school population. And so it might be that any of our books are appropriate for some students and not for others. But when they look for books to purchase, they try to have a balanced library that meets the needs of all of our students.
Would you say, you mentioned the First Amendment, and none of, freedom of speech is a huge deal, but we do have a system for limiting certain materials that come in, correct?
We do.
Okay. And in that system, do you feel like there's any way for materials to slip through that system that may not be appropriate?
I think that there's always a possibility that might happen, but I do think that the media specialists are trained, very cognizant of what they're doing, and stay on point to be able to react to what they're putting in our school library. After meeting with them, I feel very assured that they understand the process and are able to follow it and do the best that they can.
I have a question. On the committee that reviewed the book, I know 2 parents served on that committee. And I know there's administrators and teachers.
Yes.
Of those administrators, teachers, did we have parents that also served? If they were teachers and administrators, were they also parents?
Yes.
Some of those, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. You mentioned that 13 Reasons has been on our shelf since 2015, so that's about 7 years. And Earl has been on our shelf since 2017, about 4 years. Have we received any complaints or anything of this sort for either of those books during this time, during those?
No, we have not, that I'm aware of.
Thanks for presenting, appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Can you recall or remember the last time someone has requested books to be removed from our libraries?
I've been here for 10 years and I've never heard of that.
Okay.
In 10 years that I've been here.
And just to follow up, how do we evaluate our media specialists annually? How do we make sure they're, following the pulse of the community and their selections of books?
Yeah, they have a set of standards similar to teachers through the TLE process. So they are evaluated from our administrators, and they have a rubric that's set against, just like teachers do.
Any other questions?
I have one question on the new system, because that's the first that I've seen this.
I know, I'm sorry, I had to run through them, running out of time.
So kind of fast, now,
Did you want me to pull it up?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I believe we have a copy.
Mhm.
Now with this new system, that's changing the way parents can select so is that not a policy change, or will be a policy change?
No, actually, in our policy, it gives parents the right, and so we're executing that with this.
Okay, because I thought the policy gives the parents the right to take them out of the library completely, not individually select books.
No, just like I read, they have the right to discern for their own child, and so that's what we're doing. We're executing that right in a procedure.
Okay. But it doesn't give any type of grading system or anything. The parent would have to look through the long
Yeah.
list, try to find books and then research. Does it notify them when their kids check out a book and what that book was?
Well, they're actually sending that to the media specialist. So what we talked about was something similar to this. Going to the library, a student makes a list of 5 or 6 or whatever you all decide as a parent. You bring them back home, you have the discussion, you're able to look those books up and look at the resources that we provided or look at your own. And then you would then send the reservation or the checkout. It goes automatically through this system to the media specialist who will check it out and hand it to the student. And then they would have it, the parent would know, and we would all be on the same page.
So could the student rent out a book that wasn't on that list?
No, because what happens, in this process, once the parent notifies that they want to be in part of that process, we would remove that, so the student wouldn't have that ability. It would have to come from the parent, and then we would check it out to the student.
So
And
this-
then, sorry, one last question, I think I'm done. In our selection process that the librarians use,
Mhm.
which I think our librarians do a great job, it's just a lot of books.
I-
They use the community norm on what would be offensive or not?
They're all very aware of the community that we live in. I can tell you that.
Thank you.
And I apologize if you've already, said this, when would this be rolled out?
So we hope to roll it out quickly. I think I said this, but this is a framework. We might have to tweak some little processes, but, it's really there in Destiny now. So it's really a matter of, Jessica, the technology guru, being able to build it on our website and get it in our parents' hands.
So this would give parents ownership of what their kids can and cannot check out
It
in our library.
absolutely would.
Okay.
Any other questions? Great. 6, discussion, consideration, and vote to affirm or not to affirm the committee's decision to keep the books titled 13 Reasons Why, and Me and Earl and the Dying Girl in the Bixby High School Library.
I'll make a motion that we vote to affirm the committee's decision to keep the books titled 13 Reasons Why and Me and Earl and the Dying Girl in the Bixby High School Library.
Before we vote, I have a question.
Hold on, there's a motion, so we need to,
Second.
okay, now we can discuss.
Well, my discussion was, when we started it, it said vote on each book.
Sure,
So is-
we could divide it up,
That's what I
Would you rather do that?
request to divide it.
Okay.
Yes.
no problem. Okay, so Ms. Prox, could you take number 6 and divide it, please?
I'll make a motion that we vote to affirm the committee's decision to keep the book titled 13 Reasons Why in the Bixby High School Library.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion that we affirm the committee's decision to keep the book titled 13 Reasons Why in the Bixby High School Library. Would you like some discussion? So go ahead.
So I just want to, because there's a lot of stuff out there, and I just want to say, I've seen suicide firsthand, I have a lot of experience with it, with what I do, and I'm very aware that that's a big problem. It has been, it's been worse over the last couple of years among students. I read this book and I personally thought that the book was more focused on making you aware of how you behave around people, how that might affect them, rather than glorifying suicide. I will say that my daughter had checked this book out and I didn't even know it. And while I'm reading at home, she goes, "What are you reading?" I told her, and she said, "I quit reading that halfway through, that's too disturbing." And it did make me realize that my mindset may be different than the teenagers, because the book didn't seem disturbing. I mean, there was a tough scene in there, but it didn't seem suicide-wise that disturbing to me personally when I read it. I thought the book was more of a, you never know what your actions may affect somebody else. I will say, I feel like 13 Reasons Why, if our school district will use it the right way, could be a great tool to maybe help us become aware of students that might be dealing with some issues. Like if a student rents this book out, we need our counselors to reach out to that student and just say, "Hey, is everything okay? I noticed you reached 13 Reasons Why." You know what I mean? I feel like we could use this book as an advantage if we would do so. So this one was tough for me. I definitely see that there's tough spots, but in general, I kind of got the feeling that it wasn't necessarily glorifying suicide. But like I said, I feel like I'm going to vote aye on this to keep it in circulation, just because I feel like it can serve the district in a positive way to maybe help us get some light on who might be struggling with such issues.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Justin.
I'll just say, both books are, we can all agree cancer is very important. Suicide is very important. Those are very important topics for us to discuss. I think, as was mentioned, this is the tip of the iceberg. If you set a precedent of, let's get rid of all books we don't agree with. And so that's a little concerning in, from a parent, we want to be able to have the ability to trust our administration, our administrators, our site principals, our media specialists in our district to have the best interest of our children. And in my experience, since 2007, our school district has had nothing but the best interest for all of our children. That is what led me to be on the school board. There are going to be things that I don't agree with in public schools in general, as a whole, not just with books, as parents. But I can say, Mr. Miller, Miss Milligan, and all of our staff and all of our teachers have been nothing but incredible. And so there are going to be things that our kids are exposed to. Hearing the S word and hearing the F word, just go walk through the high school. It's life, right? And there are vulgar things, for us to have to shield our children from hearing. But I just do want to say that our administration is incredible in being there for our children, and being, and one thing I will say about Mr. Miller is he listens. He listens to the pulse of the community. He if somebody, he's open door policy. Call me, give him my number, give him my email, tell him to come by and talk to me. I mean, he is our superintendent. And I trust him, being able to get to work with him. We trust him in his leadership and his decisions. And anyways, I just wanted to advocate for our school district, that they care greatly about our children, all of our administrators and teachers and support staff. So, anyways, that's all. Thanks.
Anyone else?
It's a clarification before we vote. We're voting on 13 reasons why.
Correct.
And an aye vote means that you're voting to keep it in our library.
That is correct.
I would to double or to back up what Justin said on our policy about, and I underlined it, the maturity levels of the students served. I am a little bit, maybe we should revise that language a little bit, possibly if we have a media specialist evaluating the student's maturity level. You could have a 12th grader that is not mature, right? Just based on age. If we're checking books out based upon their grade, and if is the grade how we're dictating their maturity level. You know what I mean? That's such a hard subjective thing to know. And more than likely that person doesn't know that kid. So maybe we can revisit or discuss that language a little bit.
But with our, the school's process are going to put in place, parents will have ownership. Because what I choose as a parent might not be what somebody else chooses, and vice versa. Because my daughter did read 13 Reasons. I know the book well, and it was okay for her. But I also had friends that let their kids read it and friends that didn't, and I respected that as a parent's choice to be able to go that route.
Absolutely.
Any other discussion?
One, just clarification, I'm so sorry. So this is a opt-out for kids moving forward, a new procedure.
Yeah.
This is an opt-out for us parents to sign that we don't, we're gonna basically be a gateway between books and our kids and resources.
Yes.
We're gonna be there. If you don't choose to do this, will you still be notified of the books that your kids signed out
No,
or
I
checked out?
think if you were interested, you could always reach out to the librarians, and I think they're able to keep a history of books that your child has checked out, but they wouldn't automatically notify you.
But that information's available now, right?
It
We
is.
can call and see
Yes.
their checkout list. That's
You
right.
could.
Okay, thanks, Jamie.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, so we are going to vote on whether or not to affirm the committee's decision to keep the book titled 13 Reasons Why in the Bixby High School Library. Call for a vote. Julie?
Aye.
Christie?
Aye.
Justin?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye.
I'm gonna read it again. So I vote, item number 6, vote to affirm the committee's decision to keep the book titled Me and Earl and the Dying Girl in the Bixby High School Library.
Second.
Okay, we now have a motion to affirm the committee's decision to keep the book titled Me and Earl and the Dying Girl in the Bixby High School Library. And it's been seconded. Let's discuss.
Okay, I've got some discussions just among the board here. So we use, I kind of went down a rabbit hole of what obscenity, what's obscene and what's vulgar. And so freedom of speech, from what I've been able to research, is protected, but when it becomes to something that's obscene, it's not necessarily protected. It's kind of a gray area, especially when you involve minors. And we have it in our policy that we use the community norm for that standard, and that's actually one of the things that you have to check off to be obscene, is if the community would find it offensive, is one of them, and the other one is if it was sexual in nature. I think Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl, it's not about a certain type of ideology, it's not about a thought process. I love all that. We need to have all different thought processes and stuff available in the school. What concerns me about this book is just the unnecessary obscene parts in the book that is very detailed and sexual. It goes into detail that we can't even read at a school board meeting. And I actually asked some of the people if our students would be in trouble if they were caught in classroom saying quotes that were in the book. And the answer was, yeah, that it's not appropriate. So it's not appropriate to say in the school and talk about, and I struggle with, is it appropriate to read? To me, the book and the parts of the book that were sexual in nature and went into way too much detail did not help the book in its cause at all. It's really a shame in my mind, because leukemia and cancer, I have a friend of mine that his spouse has leukemia, and that's a tough deal, and kids need more books to relate to that type of stuff. It's unfortunate that this writer added such graphic sexual content in this book to me, it felt like it did not add to the book at all. They could have worded things different and had just the same impact. So my concern is, even using our own policy, that our norm of our community here in Bixby would not be okay for a majority. And I'm not saying there's people out there that's not, but if you're talking about the norm, I think most of our community people would find it offensive, the sexual content that was in this book. And this is why I think now, this system kind of changes that, because I'm really not sure how this works. Unfortunately, I wish we could have had more time to read through this possible new system that we're gonna have. And that makes it a lot tougher, because on the surface, I think this book doesn't offer anything to our school I mean, in our policy, we have all this stuff, whether, you know, it supports our school as in learning, or does it provide critical think? I don't think this book does any critical think or thought process that could have been provided by this book. Unfortunately, to me, with the obscene language and sexual content, kind of took away from that. Even our own committee agreed that it was a very edgy book and on that border. Like, the way I read that is that our committee was kind of on the line on that book as well. And they even stated that some students in the high school might be mature enough. This is a big hang up to me because our policy states that we will take into thought the maturity levels of students served. And I agree, I think some of our students might be, and some parents are okay with their children reading this. But I think if the majority of our community heard or read this book and seen some of the sayings that were in it, especially when it talks about going into the oral, and it talks about, I don't even know if I can talk about what it talks about. That's the problem. It's not a concept, it's not a belief that somebody has, it's just the obscene nature that I have a problem with. So I'm not even comfortable discussing with you, the board, of the stuff that I had problems with, because I'm not sure that's okay to do. That's hard. It's not sitting well with me. And this system, like I said, that makes it hard because I just hadn't had enough time. If I have more time to kind of understand how that works and what it does, I might vote differently, but given the information that we have right now and the amount of information I have on our new system that we're gonna try to implement, I'm gonna have to vote no on this specific vote. And the reason that I'm gonna vote no is, like I said, not based on an ideology that's against mine. It's not based on a critical think that I may not be comfortable with. It's solely based on the obscene sexual nature of some of the content.
Any other discussion?
Madam President, if I could add too that if Mr. Cheatham would like to have clarification, I think it's appropriate during this discussion, if you need clarification on the policy that's being proposed and how that would work, in a little bit more detail, we can offer that.
So is it a policy that's being proposed?
Not a policy change, it's the mechanism by which the policy will be implemented.
Okay.
So it gives parents the right to restrict access of the entire library to their child, with the exception of those books that they have researched and selected and placed on hold or reserved for their child.
I'd just like to I'd like to kind of go through and see how easy it is to use, because it sounds like it might still be a little difficult unless parents have time to go through our entire library and try to find books.
Is there a list, I mean, I have seen that there are lists of books that a parent concerns, there are parents that are wanting to be removed from the library, so that's.
So our thought process was that, most of our kids, particularly elementary and intermediate, they have library visitation time, right? And even secondary, they can go in between with their classes. So if I were a parent and I were wanting to have more control, I would ask my child to go pick out 10 books. There's also a favorites list, so you can put them in like a different hold, so that you could just pull out. And then I would have them bring that list back, and we would look them up in that library, and we would then look at reviews and make a decision about if they met our family beliefs, and ideology. That's what I would do if I were a parent, instead of going through the whole library. I would let my students still drive that if it were up to me and this is what I was doing, because I would want them to have some autonomy over some decisions, particularly when you get into high school, right? So then it's very simple. You scroll or you search for that book, you push a button, it tells you if it's available, so if it's on the shelf or not, or it's already checked out, and you click and it says hold, and it immediately flags to the media specialist. Pops up on their screen, I've seen it, and you open it and it says Jamie Milligan wants to check out, and they check it out and the book is waiting for them in the library. It is that simple.
So the parents that don't have access, or parents that don't pay attention to our Facebook and websites, and their kid comes home with Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl, and they weren't aware of it, and it's too late, and they've read this content, that's where I still struggle with that. I'd like to see a system that notifies the parent, your child has checked out a book and it's this book.
Yeah, and I don't, as far as I know, Mr. Cheatham, in, the technology that we have available for us in our system right now, we don't have a way to do that. It doesn't exist, as far as I know.
Yeah, and I'm also torn on, it's written in our own policy that we will use the community norm to
Okay.
select books, and I feel like our community norm would not appreciate the language in.
So we had
this
two
book.
parents, sole parents that, honestly, both of them have been very vocal in our school district. And so I just want you to know that I picked two parents that I knew would give me their opinion, because they have more than once about things. And one of them actually said to me, this book my son would read. So when we talk about whether or not it teaches a lesson, which it may or may not, depending on where you stand, but for her, she felt like it was a hook for a son that she has a really hard time getting him to participate in reading. And it was something that she wanted. And I will say this in the committee's defense, that we started with the parents, and I did that on purpose. I wanted to hear what they had to say before we went to anyone else on the committee, so they could speak their mind freely. It was important to me that we really vetted this process, and made sure that we were hearing from everyone.
And I think our committee did an outstanding job, and I don't think anything against, I'm sure, they were very detailed, it helped us tremendously. I think the committee did what they're supposed to do, but I still struggle. Two parents are not the majority of our community. And that's tough, because I still think if you were to put, and I've heard rumors that some of the quotes out of this book were put on a website, and that it received, I'm not a member of the Facebook page that it was put on, and I don't put a whole lot of stock in Facebook, but I guess it received a ton of comments of people just appalled. So, I get what you're saying about the committee, and I agree. I think the committee did awesome. I just worry that two people don't really represent the entire community. I still feel like myself, and I've talked to multiple, I've took this very seriously. I've talked to English teachers that are outside of our district and other school districts. I have family members that are English teachers. I've reached out to all of them. I've reached out to multiple people and I don't believe that our community as a whole, or as an average, would agree, they would find this language that was used in this to be too vulgar and obscene. So that's where I struggle.
I've read the book. The language is not comfortable for me, not something I would use in my day-to-day, but I looked at the book as having a purpose. Definitely uncomfortable. I would hope my kids would not, but I feel like a parent ownership, that's the parent's decision, and just like a parent can opt out of a assignment for a chapter book, if it's an English class, is that correct? They can still opt out and have an alternative assignment. Is that correct, Mrs. Milligan? Okay. And so with this, I think Matt talked about this, it's a slippery slope of where, a few years ago was to remove Dr. Seuss books in our libraries. And then this one, there's some uncomfortable things, but if we give, I believe so much in parent ownership. And if they get to make these decisions for their kids, they get to have that voice in there. And again, there's some parts of the book, I don't know why the author wrote it. There's some things I scratch my head too going.
So I want to clarify, because there's media specialists behind me. There is a way, for us to notify about daily checkouts that I was unaware of. So I don't know anything about that, but,
So, just a quick question, we've had some back and forth talks with, Ms. Milligan. Can we have some of that with
Sure.
her as well? Because we've had a lot.
If you have follow-up questions for
I do
clarification.
have a follow-up question. You mentioned a couple of the laws, and I looked up some of these laws online too. I found one that you didn't mention that basically stated that something that was obscene, especially with minors, is not protected under freedom of speech. Now, you hit on that a little bit.
I did.
I'm kinda curious what your research found on and we're just talking about me, Earl and the Dying Girl. But you're aware, you've read the book,
Yes.
you're aware of the language in there, especially, and it's not the language necessarily, because that's just language. I'm more concerned about the detailed, way too much detailed, and lack of better terms, kinda dirty and perverted language. What did you find as far as, the law goes? It sounded like you did some research, I'm just kinda curious.
Yeah, I mean,
And then a follow-up on that real quick, what are your thoughts now that you've seen this with us on this system?
Thank you for allowing my thought. So me and Earl and the Dying Girl, in our first meeting, I read that book, and I even said to them that it's unfortunate, he's a fun writer, and he has a good way of bringing you in, like you're saying, that parent liked it. It was unfortunate he had to go that route, what he did, because I feel like he has the potential to draw students in to wanna read, which we know a lot of them don't like to. My youngest son hates it. So, but yeah, the law, that case, the school board versus Pico really, for me, hits home that vulgarity and that obscenity is not protected, and this book to me is filled with it. And like you said, there is no, even though it's about cancer, there's so much that takes away from that message, and that's not that's not the reason I want it removed. I think it's fantastic to have a book that said, if he wrote this differently, even with a few curse words in it, would be like, this is a great book. But there are populations, we're naive sometimes, we look at how we do things, and I've learned that over the last 4 months. I've learned a lot over the last 4 months, and I tended to do that myself, looking in your own box where you sit and look at everything from that lens. But we have a population here, and every school district does, that doesn't have parents that look out for their child. That's the reality. And there are parents who are just too busy to notice or care about a book. I never did. I never thought to think that was an issue until recently. And so to just like do this where I think there's potential here, but I still think there's a lot of holes in it. It's limiting that parent that's not paying attention, or the child who doesn't have a parent that is involved or cares what they're doing. So now they have access to this book, which is filled with perversity. I mean, it's so awful what's in there. I mean, the amount of words that are used in the PUSS, it's like, why do we want this in, these are children. I'm just gonna keep going back to that. These are minors, these aren't adults, they're not thinking like adults. They're thinking like children, and that is molding their thought process. And is that how we wanna mold them moving forward, is by, these are the thoughts that are coming in, and now they're gonna be moving forward on that. So for a student that doesn't have a parent that's gonna do this, you're still allowing them access, so it limits that ability. And my one question on this, and I might not have understood, so that was my one question was, so they have to opt in and opt out, I mean, all good books, bad books, the parent has to decide.
the parent has full control.
But I'm saying, if my son goes in and I say, okay, these 2 books, I'll just use these I put on, I don't want my kid checking these 2 books out. But because I have to choose all the books, right? So he can't just go in then and have freedom to look for other books.
Correct.
Yeah.
You would have
That's
control.
not fair to his kid, because I don't like these 2 books or 5 books, that now he doesn't even have access to go find the good books.
So,
Which
funny you
there's
said,
plenty of those.
I didn't even think of that, but So are you saying, just to be clear, are you saying that you feel like this system might actually restrict our children more of having access to books?
Yeah, she just said.
Yeah.
You have to choose the good and the bad. You have to choose what books they can check out. They don't just have, you can't say, I don't want these books, then they can go get the others. They're limiting what they have access to completely. And that's not okay. It's just not.
So this is tough, cause, I mean, none of us want to kick a book out of the library. None of us wanna be a book banner or book burner at all. I mean,
No, and I
that's the
don't either.
furthest thing, at least me, I don't wanna speak for everybody on the board, but I'm pretty confident of that, but for me, I definitely don't want to fall into a trail of, hey, I don't agree with this ideology, or I don't agree with this thought process of something that may have had a history or whatever. That's not what I wanna go down, but this is, to me, this decision on this book is based solely on the vulgarity and obscenity in its sexual nature, and that period for me.
Go ahead.
Let me just make a quick comment, just to remind the board that we're actually looking at the motion to affirm this book remains in circulation. The procedures that Ms. Milligan shared with you today are based on our work with media specialists up to this. As she indicated, we recognize that there may be some holes in this and we may need to tweak this as we move forward, which is why it's not a policy, it's more of a procedure. We recognize that Mrs. Danforth and other parents in our community should have more autonomy in the selection of materials that their child can access in our libraries. What you're getting at, Mrs. Danforth, and I'll just refer to that, if a parent chooses, my child can't just go into the library and check out a book, but they can go in and say, here are some books that I want, text his parent, and the parent could actually review those if they had time, and then flag those books and say yes. And so that they can direct or approve every book that the child wants. So the child still has full access to that library, but it has to be filtered by the parent who says, yes, that book is okay, and that book is not okay. And so it's that communication between the parent and child that I recognize Ms. Danforth's concern about what about those students who don't have a parent who's going to exercise that autonomy. And so that's a decision, again, in front of the board, and based on the facts that have been presented today and the discussion that you had, the decision whether to affirm or not to affirm this book is really the topic at this point.
So we don't wanna censor one book, but you're willing to censor all of them?
Exactly.
Well, let's keep moving.
Well, just sometimes, that's what we're doing here,
Yeah.
so.
But is the censorship of
But
the
it's,
voice of the
books.
parent,
but
the opinion
it's
of
the
the
parent
parent?
doing that. The parent
No,
can
that's
say,
you saying that I now have to, because I don't want my kid to read 4 books, now he has no access to check any of them out. That's censoring. You're now doing what I'm
But it-
saying, and you're doing it in mass.
again, Mrs. Danforth, I was reminding the board that the
Okay,
discussion
well, I'm
here
just
is
reminding them as
on
well.
these books. The policy or the procedures that are set forth by our policy are still open to debate and discussion.
Okay.
And that can happen after this meeting.
So, yeah, I kinda feel like we're getting off base on this policy here, and that's what, the policy's not set, and like you're saying, we still make a lot of changes, that makes it
The procedure.
the procedure, not policy. So that makes it hard. I'm going to have to vote on just the book alone, because we're still not sure what this exactly looks like. I love this, I love, you guys I have nothing but faith you guys will come up with an awesome deal like our administration always does, cause you guys are rock stars, but for me, for now, I'm gonna have to vote just specifically on this book.
And again, I don't wanna belabor the point, but these procedures were implemented or recommended in recognition of the concerns that Mrs. Danforth brought to us. And I told her at the time that I applauded her courage and conviction in stepping forward with the passion and in a very polite, respectful way, and entering these conversations. So what we're doing as a district is trying to recognize that we do have books on our shelf that may be objectionable to some parents, but that community norm is so difficult to measure. It depends on who you're talking to in our community. And so as a means of recognizing that a parent should, and we want to partner with parents in making sure they have control over what their child has access to in our libraries, we recommended these policy or procedural changes as a start. It doesn't have to be this, it can go through more review, but it was just an example of recognition that yes, this is something, it's in our policy, and we need to make sure we've got a mechanism that affords parents that right to be able to make those choices.
Yeah, I would just discuss that, our First Amendment rights are critical for us to observe. Like I said, creating a slippery slope or opening Pandora's box here to evaluate all literature in our schools is not a precedent I really want to set in this vote. Just some thoughts here I wrote down on this book specifically is how would a committee of ninth graders view it? If the committee of I've heard several say, Dad, why are you reading that? I put that down. Or I wouldn't want my kid to read this. You know, a committee of adults compared to an actual student committee who would possibly read that could be drastically different in the perception, just a thought. And then when is the measure of decency and common sense involved in an evaluation as a person in our community? I know as a parent, I know all of our all of our district, we care about decency and we care about, you know, this gets back to some of these issues about canceling things and getting things out. Like a lot of stuff is just common sense, just doesn't, it's like, it's common sense. Like, why would you keep that in your school? And I'll say on First Amendment, banning a book or getting rid of a book, we have liaisons that are scanning books who are deciding yes or no on books. So they're deciding, right? Like our staff is deciding what gets in our libraries and what doesn't. And we're being asked now as a board, as a group of parents, to kick a book out of our library that is vulgar in nature. So I'm just asking myself these questions. Where does decency and common sense come into play on this book specifically, like Justin keeps saying? I'm trying not to get wrapped up in the down the road view, but those are just things I've been thinking. You know, I think a group of ninth graders might evaluate the book a little differently than a group of adults or a group of sophomores. So.
I just want to clarify, is the book Me and Earl and the Dying Girl is only at the high school?
Right.
It's not currently
I'm sorry.
at ninth grade. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank
It
you.
was though, it was in the ninth.
Can I, what if she mean it was?
I don't think it hasn't.
It was. That's Linda Ricks, it was.
It was my understanding that 13 Reasons Why was on the shelf.
They
but
both
that-
were there.
Hold on.
13 Reason Why, was recorded in both libraries. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl was only in circulation at the high school.
No, that's untrue, cause I approached her about both of them.
Mine was I was just saying ninth grader as a grade.
No,
so,
I know what your point
I
was.
wasn't specifically honing in on ninth grader. I was just saying, if we had a committee of high schoolers, let's say that,
10.
you know, how would they view the vulgarity of
I
the
know
book?
what you mean,
And
yeah.
so, anyways.
Can I get I read it and I'm just curious, I know, can I get some clarification? If, say we were a vote to remove this book, we have clauses where it can come back in a certain amount of time, is that correct?
No, I think the policy says 3 years if the district, based on the decision you made tonight, whether it's to affirm or not to affirm, that decision is final for 3 years.
So in 3 years, a book could come back if we had the reason I ask is, I'm just trying to think, in 3 years, a book could come back if we had all of our, this new system that we're kind of entertaining. If we had all the kinks worked out of that system and it's working great, you could technically bring a book back after 3 years.
You could bring either one of these back after 3 years, whether we have this in place or not, according to penalty.
Do we have any type of internal rating system on books? I mean, I know we have so many, but I mean, do we use a
It's not
rating
a
system?
popular opinion, but I will say the Common Sense Media does, pull out things and rate them. So you can look at, foul language or, any of those things that you would think about. I always think about movies in relation to that. It does break those down. So it's the only one, is one of the reasons that I wanted it there, because when you pull the book up, you can see a rating, and then you could go to other sources if you wanted to read more about that, but it does break down a somewhat rating system based on those things that you might think in your mind should be flagged.
I just think if you check a book out, you know, and I get a notification, you know, am I gonna, like, will you just get the title of the book, or would you get a, like,
You
yeah,
have to go.
and then I would have to go
Mhm.
resource it,
I don't
so,
know of anything, not that,
yeah.
But there's no notification though, if you check it.
no, actually, they told me, remember the media session told me.
Yeah,
There
Or
is
do
a
what?
you
Oh,
can have a
yes.
notification,
Mhm.
yes, if your kid's checking out.
Oh,
the
okay.
book.
They
See,
corrected
there's a
me.
lot in this new system that I'm just not.
It's not new, that part's
That's
not
not
new.
new.
It's
Yeah.
not,
Oh, it's
they
not.
corrected me, I was incorrect.
Okay, so could you restate that, then what?
Yeah, so my understanding, and I have not seen this, so, that it can, notify you of books that have been checked out. So, you know, Destiny is its own standalone system, and they are the experts in that system.
So can I just say, why are we allowed to just bring in information that's beyond what we were supposed to be talking about today? I don't have someone sitting behind me giving me tips on what else to say. This is bold. This is so taken.
It is relevant though for a
Of course it's
discussion.
relevant on what.
I wanna hear everyone's side. I mean, I appreciate everyone's point of view on this.
Well, so do I, but I think we're here, she was granted 15 minutes and so was I. No one else is allowed to speak, but she's allowed to hear from someone that works at the school and then say what it is. I don't have someone texting me behind here, oh, say this, oh, say that,
We
and
were
I'm
asking
saying it.
specific questions that we were unsure
I'm just
of.
making a note
Just
that.
trying to be as thorough as we can on this one.
Okay.
That this is a tough decision, cause no, like I said, I don't wanna be kicking books out of a library, but I do hear what you're saying, it seems like the information's changing too as we go along.
That's not fair.
That's
I'm
why I
sorry,
think
it's just not.
I have to vote on just the book.
Yeah, and again, that's the motion in front of the board. This discussion is ancillary, and it really was, again, in recognition of our policy and parents' request to have more authority. That process can be better defined. We'll have additional meetings, and we'll be happy to brief the board at a later date on some of those changes based on the questions you've asked us tonight.
I just wanna be clear, a vote for me is a vote in disagreement with the selection of the book, not an oppression of our First Amendment rights.
Could you just elaborate on that? I'm not really.
I can disagree with that the book was selected for our library.
Oh.
That's what I'm voting on. If you wanna go check the book out, I mean, we can disagree with that.
Yeah.
As parents, right? Like, we can disagree with that book was selected, you know? And again, for me personally, I'm gonna have to vote no because of just the lack of decency and common sense, and like, it just doesn't make sense to have our students exposed to that. If this was in a pornographic magazine, we wouldn't allow it in our schools, right? Like, why is it different? Like, it's bold, it's very vulgar. you know, and, anyways.
Any other discussion? All right, so the current motion